You know, a lot of people equate success to financial, bank accounts, et cetera, et cetera. Having been out in the world and then come back to school after almost 20 years, it kind of changes your thought process, your definition there. So for me, I look at that and say, well, number one, it has to be something I love doing. Music fits that. It's part of who I am and was and should have never gotten away from it to begin with. So anything for me that I can use my interest or love of music to create some kind of income. I'm not talking about the CEO's pay. I'm not looking to get on become the second Prince and play my trumpet like he plays his guitar and sell bazillion pop albums and all of that kind of stuff. I think it's relegated to doing something in the field that you're really happy and satisfied with, that you can make your monthly nut with, and if you've got something left over to stick aside, I think that's great. I think there are different ways that you can also do that with too, other than just performance. All the writing and arranging we talk about, teaching and educating, private lessons, etc.
Any other ideas, Monica?
For me, I think going at it was never when I started. It was a hobby, and it's a passion, I guess now. It was a hobby when I started it. I never saw it as a career option for myself, but for me, being a successful musician isn't financial. It's just about me still being able to learn, even when I'm older, still trying to get better. Because I saw a lot of my friends, like, if you're in public schools, if your school didn't have an orchestra, you stopped playing. And that was sad to me. Or I saw a lot of friends who graduated before me in high school, and then they didn't major in college, and then they stopped playing their instrument, or they just couldn't play it as well as they used to, and they were sad about it. And so the reason I double majored was to keep it in my life. But again, it wasn't like a career choice for me. I would just be happy with myself if I never stopped playing, and I was also getting better.
Do you see a career?
I never have in it. Not that I don't want it. This is a whole very complicated question because it goes back to your culture and your family and other things. But as long as I got to play with people I still want to play with like I am now forever, and then also being supportive of the arts, which is I think a big deal. The reason the arts are suffering is because there's not enough people who know enough about it to care. So I want to be one of those people who cares for it, even if I'm not the professional musician up there, but I'll go see their show and I will go to their show. So I don't know, it's just making it something that you don't lose in your life if you love it, even if you can't make it your career.
How many of you think you see a career in your future in music, or would like to have a career? However you define it. It might be in the terms of that you're a successful. Your idea of success could be, like you said, to be the best player you can be, to be afforded the opportunities to play. I think the reason I asked everybody to come up, and I knew this was going to go in, we were going to have to think about defining success. Is a successful career a career that you support your family? Those kind of things change. That's the attitudes about what that means can change as your career unfolds. We've all had very different career paths, but we're all up here in the same place. But my career for 45 years, I think about now, and I've never done anything that wasn't music, and I consider that to be very successful. And and I did fall into the holy grail of tenure track university professor, but I wasn't making a lot of money. Money was not a big thing for me. But the idea that I've always been able to do something in music, my path has not been as jazz-centric, I think, as some of these guys has. It's gone all, I would take forever to tell you all the things I've done in music. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was how can you, I think that we, sometimes when people come for advice and we're talking about success, and it seems, some people seem a little bit pessimistic, like, well, I don't know, why am I going to, I'm very optimistic for all of you, in that you can have, I think you can have a career in music. I think there's a way to path that out. If it's kind of falls in line a little bit with some of the stuff Alan was talking about finding you know, committing and that sort of thing. But I do think you can plan, I do think you can set a career goal, and I think you can reach it. There are some, would you like to add any of this yet?
Yeah, sounded great to me. But
Well, you know, it's interesting when we talk about success and what you were saying about getting to play what you want to play. I mean, that's so general. You know what I mean? And I suppose, Charlie, you could say that you've done a lot of gigs where I don't know if you even thought in those terms, like. You know, and I think we've all done those kind of gigs where you just show up and play, whether it be super hip jazz or whether it be with Don Rickles.
My goal has always been to be involved in music, and so I've played, you know, I've played shows, I've played country bands, I've played in rock bands, I've played in circuses, I've played ice shows, I've played comedy shows. You know, I like to do everything. I don't really think that, well, if I'm not playing jazz or writing jazz, that's not good.
But that's not such a, like, if you think about somebody like Chick Corea, who is one of the great musicians of our time. I was reading where he said when he started, and he was just doing gigs around Massachusetts, he did all different kinds of gigs, and he really got into that. And it was all about, like, well, I want to play whatever kind of music is appropriate for this situation, whether it be a country gig, or whether it be a polka, or whether it'd be whatever. And it was that sort of like just being skilled rather than, well, I'm going to play my Return to Forever stuff on this country. You know what I mean? It wasn't about that. It was just like, I'm going to play this role. But doing that, especially when you're young, it makes you develop so much skill that when you finally do get to the point where you kind of have your own voice and you want to do your own gigs, that will help your music. I mean, and not everybody wants to go there necessarily. You know what I mean? I don't know if everybody's meant to go there. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a musician who just plays a whole bunch of gigs. You know what I mean? I respect that. I have a lot of respect for that.
There's a book, if you're interested. I hope I remember the name of this right. I know the author for sure. The author's name is Ramon Ricker, R-A-M-O-N.
Raymond Ricker.
Oh, Raymond Ricker, R-I-C-K-E-R. And I believe the name of the book is Notes from the Musical Underground. Is that it?
No, that's not it. But you look up,
Ramon Ricker.
You can find it.
Ramon Ricker he's a professor of music at Eastman, Eastman.
Is it?
Yeah, he's involved. He was involved for a long time. Yeah.
Lessons from a Streetwise Professor.
Right.
Lessons from a Streetwise Professor. What they don't teach you in college. And this is he was a jazz professor. Is a jazz professor. He's a very well-known author, jazz educator. He's a classical clarinet player. Plays in the Rochester Symphony. He's a major contractor. He's a major contractor in the area. He's been involved in almost every facet of employment in terms of music. And so he is part of, Eastman has a program kind of in entrepreneurship where they talk about how do you fashion a career for yourself, how do you succeed. And his book is the book that really gets me thinking about this all the time, because he talks about just how many people come out of the schools these days, what positions are open, all that sort of stuff. But he's very optimistic. The thing I like about the book is that it's not in the least bit pessimistic about your chances of having a career in music. But he does have a path, and he has a way of thinking about it. And one of the things that he talks about, and it doesn't matter if you want to be a jazz musician, it has any kind of a musician, he talks about it's a very sort of systematic way of, he calls them Legos. You guys know what Legos are? They're building blocks for your career. And what he talks about is, and especially when you're young, and it's like what George is talking about, if I go to a gig, let's say, well, my first Lego was teaching. I got my teaching credential when I was teaching middle school band, of all things. And So I learned how to do that, and I learned how to communicate with parents, and I learned how to conduct a high school band, right? This is way before anything in my career is, I'm doing exactly what a lot of you are doing. I'm in college, so I get kind of good at that. That's my Lego. So he says, there's one place of your career, it sits there, all right? If I go on, let's say, for instance, what happened to me was I got interested in jazz. And so I started writing a lot of jazz in college and writing big band charts and got pretty good at it. And people were wanting to play my charts and things like that. So that became another Lego for me. That was another base. But what he talks about, and I don't want to just have this be a reiteration of his book, because I want to know what these guys think too, but basically what he says, okay, now you have two Legos. Don't forget your first Lego, as you move up. Now I have some communication skills. I know how to work with kids, which comes in handy when you work with musicians of all ages. So I know how to do that. I have conducting skills. I've developed writing skills. There's my second Lego, right? So then at some point in there I started playing a little more, and I got better at playing, and my communication skills Lego fed my playing Lego, because I learned to communicate well with other people. I learned sometimes, I learned some business, and he has a whole thing about business strategies, which I hope we talk about pretty soon. So he gradually talks about that you add, but you never leave the things that you started with, right? So that, and then different things add up, and that's how eventually there used to be this class here in careers in music, and they would always ask me to be the first one because I'd have all these I have a lot of Legos, and everybody always comes to me. A lot of people say, I say, what do you want to do? And they say, I want to be you. I want your job. You've got, man, would you not agree that this is about the best job on the planet? I mean, in terms of, it's not.
Your job is.
My job is. I'm going to have to think about that answer. I'm not sure if that's what the implication is. It's a great job. It's a lovely job. It's a wonderful job. It was a total stroke of luck to get this job, but it was also something that I was prepared for, which is why I got it. It fell in my lap, literally, and that's a lot of times success and gigs, and they fall in your lap, but they'll only stay in your lap if you're ready for it, And so everything that I do here, writing, arranging, conducting, everything I do goes all the way back to my first year out of college working with middle school beginning band. It all developed out. So that part of the message to you is don't lose track, right? And don't necessarily dismiss something as irrelevant. I mean, I'm not saying you have to play music you don't like to play or anything like that, but I'm saying, kind of like what George is saying, if you do play another kind of music or you do play another kind of a gig, approach it in such a sense that you are actually building your basement.
But I sort of wanted to tie some of this into what Alan, if you were here for Alan's class before, we was talking about prejudice, and how if you come into a situation with a preconceived notion, and that can be, the implication is always with prejudice that it's a racial prejudice, but like just a situational or a musical prejudice, like if you're sort of like, well, I'm not going to take that gig because I hate that music or whatever, and then you might be closing a door, and then what if you do take the gig and you're like, wow, this is fun, and then that gig leads to tons of other opportunities, I think for me, a lot of my early gigs as a pianist were with singers, Now, some of you may have a certain idea, and I know that there's really no singers here, which I actually think is unfortunate. But, there's a certain prejudice that people have about working with singers, and I won't go through all the jokes now, maybe later. But, but if I had said, well, I'm not going to work with singers, because, you know, then there's a whole bunch of opportunities that I would not have had, and I probably wouldn't have even stayed in New York. I probably would have just had to go back to Baltimore or whatever. You know? But I mean, I got a lot out of it, and there's a lot of skills you can learn playing with singers that you don't really get anywhere else, you know, but it all ties together. So, what are we talking about?
Yeah, and so what I wanted to do was also, so let's assume that we want to be successful musicians, and we'll define, you can define success, whether it's monetary success, whether it's, and like I said, that may change as you get older, or just artistic success. What's that book? There's a book that came out a couple of years ago. It was something like Common Traits of Successful Businessmen, and it was different things that all successful businessmen had in common.
It's not the seven.
Is it seven?
Highly,
Oh, is that for the?
highly effective.
Yeah.
That guy just died, Stephen.
I would like to open the conversation to a musician's equivalent of that. Okay. Let's start, and I would love to get there. You know, these. So not only do we have a very varied music career and things like that, but I think we've also all been in a position, well, to be hired by somebody else, but I think we've all been in a position to actually do the hiring of other people. And if you want to be successful, certainly part of being successful is to be coveted by your fellow musicians to work and that sort of thing. I get calls all the time from people that want musicians and they want students, and it's my job to recommend them. So I have a kind of a list of the things that I look for before I recommend people. So that's kind of like what I'd like to talk about now. Would you like to share any ideas, anybody? Let's, go ahead.
I was saying, I'd kind of like to hear from Dave, because I mean, I think all three of us are university professors, so we function in one side of the music business and have, I mean, for however many years, Charlie and I for longer than George, but Dave is the only actually fully freelance musician here right now, sitting up here. And so I'm kind of curious for you, how you sort of resolve these issues, and I think you have a bit of an original way of doing it.
I think when you're trying to plan your career path, you've got to be clear about certain things you need out of your career. There are different directions you go. If you have a family, you've got a baby, you need health insurance. What are you going to do? You marry a wife with health insurance, you get a master's degree, doctorate, and get a university gig. So a lot of people, for the past few years, all the better players, top-tier New York players, have been going and keep going after these university gigs that they weren't playing. It was kind of a
Totally disdaining.
that was slumming, and
Yeah.
right,
At one time.
15 years ago, that was
True.
not happening. And now the gigs aren't really that happening in New York, and it's hard to really make a decent living, you know, as a working musician there. So if you're taking out a bunch of loans to go to school, you're going to find yourself out of school with a big student loan payment, and you're going to be having to do something other than music when you get out, just to pay off your student loans. So if you can avoid your student loans, then you can kind of keep all your expenses really low. Like someone like Stoll, that's another good
John
example
Stoll.
of someone who has a very, very low, you know, he keeps it, travels really light and just drives around and sets up his own gigs. You know, that's kind of a new business model for players now. You don't have a booking
It's the
agent.
itinerant gypsy
Yeah.
musician, actually.
Yeah.
It's a pretty old business model. It's just hard to
You
do
guys
in
know
the
who
modern
John
modern
Stoll
world.
is?
That's all.
Guitar
No, he
player.
is. I'm not familiar with the
I mean,
process that he's mentioning
he's
though.
a great guitar player, but he just basically does, I
He
guess.
lives out of a suitcase.
Yeah, but they call it playing singles, right?
Right.
You
He
book a
couch
rhythm
surfs
section.
everywhere he
Yeah.
goes, stays with friends.
Yeah, you kind of make connections. I mean, and he's all over the world, Europe
Yeah.
and.
South America, everywhere.
Books everything himself.
Does he
Right.
also do master classes as well?
Master classes
Universities
too,
and stuff?
private lessons, you know.
Went to a bunch of
So you I think the industry has changed so much, and the colleges really haven't changed the curriculum to keep up with the new reality once you get out of school. You don't have these gigs where you're hired for a month straight, and you don't have these big bands that people used to go on the road with after they got out of school. Even, you know, there's maybe cruise ships that you can get on when you get out to get a little experience, but those are harder to get nowadays too. So you kind of have to be developing some other kind of coping strategy by the time you get out of school to be able to actually get gigs, do all your own promotion. And it seems like now you have to promote your gigs in a way you didn't have to before. You've got to do all your promotion and your PR and radio interviews and press and everything. You keep up your web presence. Where before you kind of depended on the clubs to do all that, and they didn't really expect it. They would make the musicians have to do all your promo and be responsible for getting people out to your gigs. So, I mean, that's become a huge component now of being a working musician, is being able to be really on top of your promotional aspect and have all your media contacts and your radio interviews and, you know, for any gig you do, and all your promotion. It's really hard to get a booking agent now, you know.
A lot of that is if you're doing your own gigs.
Right.
You know, and it's interesting because, you know, I think there's a big difference between being a band leader or being somebody who goes out and do these singles, or being a sideman. And I mean, again, I keep coming back to my man here saying to play the music you want to play. And so if you're going to be a sideman, that's relative, because if you're the band leader, you definitely, I mean, hopefully you're playing music you want to play. But if you're the sideman, it still might be fun, but you never know. I mean, there's a big variation there. So if you're being called, you're more of a servant, or the tendency is to be more like, okay, I'm playing music that the leader is choosing. And, you know, there's collaborative things.
If you're a horn player, though, you can't depend on being a sideman anymore. You've got smaller groups, you've got to, if I wasn't booking gigs and being a leader, I wouldn't be working at all.
Right. Well, I mean, this is where rhythm section players have an advantage, particularly bass players.